When people hear the name Queen Elizabeth, they often picture two very different women from two very different times in history. Queen Elizabeth I ruled England from 1558 to 1603, more than 400 years ago. Queen Elizabeth II ruled the United Kingdom from 1952 until her death in 2022. Both women were powerful, deeply respected, and extraordinarily important to British history. Both carried the same name. But does sharing a name mean they shared the same blood? Who was Queen Elizabeth I? Queen Elizabeth I was born on September 7, 1533, at Greenwich Palace in England. Her father was King Henry VIII, one of the most famous and powerful kings in all of English history. Known for his 6 marriages, his enormous personality, and his decision to break England away from the Catholic Church. Her mother was Anne Boleyn, the second of Henry VIII's 6 wives. Anne Boleyn was accused of crimes against the king and was executed when Elizabeth was only 2 years old. This meant that Elizabeth grew up without her mother and in a royal court that was often dangerous and unpredictable. Elizabeth I belongs to a royal family called the House of Tudor. The Tudor dynasty began when her grandfather, King Henry VII, won the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 and took the English throne from King Richard III. The Tudor family went on to rule England for 118 years, from 1485 to 1603. During that time, they transformed England into a strong, centralized nation and oversaw massive changes in religion, culture, and politics. Elizabeth I was the last Tudor monarch. She never married and never had children of her own. Because of this, people called her the Virgin Queen, a title she wore with pride throughout her long and successful reign. This single fact, that she had no children, is the most important thing to understand when it comes to the bloodline question, because it means that no one alive today, including Queen Elizabeth II, can be a direct descendant of Elizabeth I herself. She left behind no children, no grandchildren, and no living line of descendants. When Elizabeth I died on March 24, 1603, at Richmond Palace at the age of 69, the direct Tudor bloodline ended with her forever. The Tudor family tree, where it all began. To understand the connection between the two Elizabeths properly, we need to go back to the very beginning of the Tudor family and look carefully at the branches that grew out from it. King Henry VII is the root of everything we are discussing. He was born in 1457 in Wales and became King of England in 1485 after his victory at Bosworth Field. Henry VII was a careful, intelligent ruler who worked hard to make the Tudor dynasty stable and powerful. He married a woman named Elizabeth of York, who was the daughter of the previous king, Edward IV. By marrying her, Henry VII united 2 rival royal houses, the House of Lancaster, which was his own family's line, and the House of York, which was her family's line. This marriage ended a long and bloody period of civil war known as the Wars of the Roses, and established peace across the kingdom. Together, Henry VII and Elizabeth of York had several children who survived to adulthood, and these children are the key figures in our bloodline story. Their eldest son, Arthur, Prince of Wales, was born in 1486. He married a Spanish princess named Catherine of Aragon, but died young at the age of 15, before ever becoming king. Their second son, born in 1491, would grow up to become King Henry VIII, the father of Queen Elizabeth I. They also had 2 daughters who are critical to our story. Margaret Tudor was born in 1489, and Mary Tudor was born in 1496. Of all these children, the 2 most important names for our investigation are Henry VIII and Margaret Tudor, because these 2 siblings became the ancestors of the 2 different Elizabeths we are studying. Henry VIII's line goes directly to Elizabeth I, while Margaret Tudor's line goes on a longer, more complicated journey that eventually leads to Elizabeth II. Without understanding both of these branches, the full picture cannot be seen clearly. Elizabeth I bloodline. The path from Henry VII to Queen Elizabeth I is short and completely direct. It moves in just 3 steps, spanning only 3 generations. Henry VII and Elizabeth of York had a son named Henry, who grew up to become King Henry VIII. Henry VIII had 6 wives during his lifetime, and through 3 of them, had 3 children who survived to adulthood. His son Edward became King Edward VI, but died young at the age of 15. His daughter Mary became Queen Mary I, who ruled before Elizabeth and is remembered for restoring Catholicism to England during her brief reign. Then, after Mary's death in 1558, Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife Anne Boleyn, became Queen Elizabeth I. The chain is therefore Henry VII, then Henry VIII, then Queen Elizabeth I. That is 3 generations. Elizabeth I was Henry VII's granddaughter. On her father's side, her bloodline was pure Tudor. On her mother's side, through Anne Boleyn, she had English noble ancestry. She was a product of the Tudor dynasty in every sense, and she embodied everything the Tudors had built over the previous 70 years. As already established, Elizabeth I died in 1603 without any children or grandchildren. This permanently closed the direct Tudor bloodline. No future monarch could ever be a direct descendant of Elizabeth I herself. However, future monarchs could still be related to her if they descended from one of the other branches of Henry VII's family, and that is exactly what happened through the Scottish branch of the family tree. Margaret Tudor, the branch that changed everything. Now we turn to the other side of Henry VII's family tree, the branch that would eventually lead, hundreds of years later, to Queen Elizabeth II. Henry VII's daughter Margaret Tudor married King James IV of Scotland in 1503. This was a political marriage, carefully arranged to create peace and friendship between England and Scotland, 2 kingdoms that had frequently been at war with each other. Margaret was 13 years old at the time of the marriage. James IV was 30. Despite the large age gap, which was common in royal marriages of that era, the marriage produced several children, though many of them died young. Their most important surviving child was James V of Scotland, born in 1512. James V grew up to become King of Scotland and ruled until his death in December 1542. He fathered a daughter named Mary, who was born in December 1542, just days before her father died. Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was only 6 days old, because her father's death was so sudden and so soon after her birth. She would need many years and many advisors before she was old enough to rule on her own. This Mary grew up to be one of the most dramatic and tragic figures in all of British history. She is known to history as Mary, Queen of Scots. She was educated in France, where she spent much of her childhood, and she was considered one of the most beautiful and educated women in Europe. She married 3 times, and each marriage brought its own set of problems, scandals, and dangers. Her life was marked by political conspiracy, religious conflict, and accusations of involvement in the murder of her second husband. She was eventually forced to give up her throne in Scotland and fled to England in 1568 to seek protection from her cousin Queen Elizabeth I of England. Instead of receiving protection, Mary was held as a political prisoner for 19 years. Elizabeth I finally ordered her execution in 1587, convinced that Mary's supporters were plotting to put Mary on the English throne. But before all of that tragedy, Mary, Queen of Scots, had a son. That son was born in June 1566, and his name was James. He was raised in Scotland, educated well, and grew into a serious and thoughtful ruler. He became King James VI of Scotland and would later become the single most important figure in connecting the Scottish and English thrones permanently. The bloodline from Henry VII through this Scottish branch reads: Henry VII, then Margaret Tudor, then James V of Scotland, then Mary Queen of Scots, and then James VI of Scotland. That is 5 generations from the founding Tudor king down to James VI. James I, the man who united 2 kingdoms. When Queen Elizabeth I of England died in March 1603 without any children or direct heirs, England urgently needed a new ruler. The question of who would take the throne had been one of the great anxieties of Elizabeth's reign, precisely because she had refused to marry or name a successor for so long. Parliament and the royal court searched the family tree and found that the closest living royal relative with a legitimate claim to the English throne was James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the great-great-grandson of King Henry VII through the Scottish branch of the Tudor family. James VI of Scotland was therefore invited to become King of England as well, and he accepted. He traveled south from Edinburgh to London and was crowned King James I of England in 1603, while still remaining King James VI of Scotland. This historic moment united the crowns of England and Scotland under one person for the first time, even though England and Scotland would not formally merge into a single nation until the Act of Union in 1707. In terms of the family tree, James I was Elizabeth I's first cousin twice removed, meaning they shared a common ancestor in Henry VII, but through different branches of the family, separated by several generations of descent. James I belongs to the royal family known as the House of Tudor, sometimes spelled Stuart in its Scottish form. The Stuarts were originally a Scottish royal family, and with James I, they began ruling England as well. He reigned until his death in 1625, and was succeeded by his son King Charles I, whose reign ended disastrously with the English Civil War and his own execution in 1649. After a period of republican rule under Oliver Cromwell, the monarchy was restored in 1660 under James I's grandson, King Charles II. James I also had a daughter, whose descendants would eventually lead to Queen Elizabeth II, and her story is the next essential chapter in our investigation. Elizabeth Stuart, the Winter Queen, and the road to Hanover. James I had several children, and among them was a daughter named Elizabeth Stuart, born in 1596. She was intelligent, lively, and deeply important to the future of British monarchy, even though her own life was filled with heartbreak and exile. Elizabeth Stuart married a man named Frederick V, who was the Elector Palatine, a powerful and prestigious German prince who controlled a significant territory in Central Europe. In 1619, Frederick was offered the crown of Bohemia, a kingdom roughly where the Czech Republic is today, by Protestant nobles who had risen against their Catholic Habsburg rulers. Frederick and Elizabeth accepted the Bohemian crown with great excitement, but their reign lasted only one winter season before the Habsburg forces defeated them militarily and forced them into exile. Because of this embarrassingly short reign, history has called Elizabeth Stuart the Winter Queen. She and Frederick spent the rest of their lives largely in exile in the Dutch city of The Hague, dependent on the charity of other European rulers. Frederick died in 1632, leaving Elizabeth to raise their children largely on her own in difficult and uncertain circumstances. Despite the hardships of her life, Elizabeth Stuart had 13 children, and it is through one of those children that the most important step in our bloodline story takes place. One of her daughters was named Sophia, born in 1630. Sophia grew up in the educated, cultured, though often impoverished household of her exiled mother. She became known as an intelligent and witty woman with a genuine interest in philosophy and politics. She married a German prince named Ernest Augustus, who was the Elector of Hanover, giving her both a stable home and a powerful political position. Together they had several children, including a son who would one day be King of Great Britain. The Act of Settlement. Parliament chooses the next royal line. Sophia of Hanover became critically important to British history because of a law passed by the English Parliament in 1701, called the Act of Settlement. To understand why this law mattered so much, we need to briefly step back and look at the religious politics of late 17th century England. After Charles II died in 1685, his brother became King James II of England. James II was openly Catholic in a country that had been officially Protestant since the time of Henry VIII. His Catholic faith alarmed Parliament and the English public enormously, and in 1688, in an event known as the Glorious Revolution, he was forced from the throne and replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary II and her Dutch husband William III. After William III died in 1702, the throne passed to his sister-in-law Queen Anne, the last of the Stuart monarchs. Anne had 17 pregnancies during her lifetime, but tragically, not a single one of her children survived to adulthood. It became painfully clear that when Anne died, the direct Stuart line would end. Parliament was desperate to ensure that the throne would not fall to a Catholic Stuart claimant, of whom there were several in Europe. So Parliament examined the royal family tree very carefully, and found that Sophia of Hanover, as the granddaughter of King James I of England through Elizabeth Stuart, was the closest Protestant relative to the British throne. The Act of Settlement declared that if the current ruling line died out without Protestant heirs, the throne would pass to Sophia and her Protestant descendants. Sophia herself died on June 8, 1714, just a few weeks before Queen Anne, which meant she never actually became queen. But because the Act of Settlement covered her descendants as well, the throne passed immediately and directly to her son. Sophia's link back through history runs Henry VII, then Margaret Tudor, then James V of Scotland, then Mary Queen of Scots, then James I of England, then Elizabeth Stuart, then Sophia of Hanover. That is 7 generations from the founding Tudor king all the way down to Sophia, the Hanoverian dynasty, a German king for an English throne. When Queen Anne of England died on August 1, 1714, the throne passed as Parliament had arranged to Sophia's son, George Louis. He became King George I of Great Britain, and with his accession, a completely new royal dynasty began, the House of Hanover. George I was born in Hanover, Germany, and had spent his entire life there before being summoned to London to be king. He spoke very little English at the time and found much of British culture foreign and confusing. He spent a significant portion of his reign traveling back to Hanover and left much of the day-to-day governing of Britain to his ministers, which helped establish the tradition of a politically neutral monarchy supported by an active parliament and a prime minister. George I reigned until 1727 and was succeeded by his son King George II, who reigned until 1760. George II was succeeded by his grandson, King George III, who reigned for 60 years, from 1760 to 1820. George III is remembered in American history as the king who lost the American colonies during the Revolutionary War. He had 15 children with his wife Queen Charlotte, giving the royal family a large number of descendants. George III was succeeded by his son George IV, who reigned from 1820 to 1830, and then by another son, William IV, who reigned from 1830 to 1837. William IV died without any legitimate children surviving into adulthood, which meant the throne needed to move again, this time to the next available relative. Queen Victoria and the birth of the modern royal family. When King William IV died in 1837, the throne passed to his niece Victoria, an 18-year-old young woman who had grown up in a strict and somewhat sheltered household. Few people expected the shy, small-statured teenager to become one of the most dominant and influential figures in world history. But that is exactly what happened. Victoria reigned for 63 years, from 1837 to 1901, the second longest reign in British history, surpassed only by Elizabeth II herself. Queen Victoria's father was Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, the fourth son of King George III. Her mother was Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, a German princess. Victoria's father died when she was only 8 months old, so she was raised entirely by her German mother. In 1840, Victoria married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Prince Albert was German, disciplined, intellectually gifted, and deeply committed to using his position to promote education, science, and the arts across Britain. Together, Victoria and Albert had 9 children, all of whom survived to adulthood, which was genuinely remarkable for the era. Many of Victoria and Albert's children married into the royal families of other European countries. Their daughters and sons became queens, kings, emperors, and empresses across the continent, from Russia to Germany, to Spain to Norway. Because of this extraordinary spread of royal marriages, Queen Victoria became known as the grandmother of Europe. Virtually every major European royal family in the 20th century could trace a line of descent back to her and Prince Albert. Because Victoria had married Prince Albert, who belonged to the German House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the British royal family technically changed its dynastic name. Even though the royal family was thoroughly British in culture, language, and tradition, its official name was now the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. This German name would cause serious problems in a future that Victoria and Albert could not have imagined during their reign. The name changed to Windsor. When World War I broke out in 1914, Britain and Germany became bitter and deadly enemies. Millions of British soldiers fought and died in the trenches against the German military. The mood in Britain turned sharply against anything German, and the British royal family suddenly found itself in an extremely awkward position. Their official name was the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a German name. The reigning monarch, King George V, was Queen Victoria's grandson and had German ancestry through Prince Albert, even though he himself had been born and raised in Britain and was deeply British in every way that mattered. In July 1917, King George V made a historic and pragmatic decision. He formally announced that the British royal family would drop its German dynastic name and replace it with a new English name. He chose the name Windsor after Windsor Castle, the grand medieval fortress in Berkshire that has been one of the most important royal residences in England for almost 1,000 years. The name Windsor sounded deeply English, was associated with centuries of royal history, and had absolutely no German connection whatsoever. With that single announcement, the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha ceased to exist, and the House of Windsor was born. It is extremely important to understand that this name change was purely a matter of politics and public relations. It did not alter the actual bloodline in any way, it did not change who the family members were, and it did not affect the family's relationships with one another. The royal family was the same family as before, with the same ancestry, the same relatives, and the same bloodline. When we say that Queen Elizabeth II belonged to the House of Windsor, we are really saying that she belonged to the same family line that was previously Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which was itself the Hanoverian line, which ultimately descended, the direct path to Queen Elizabeth II. With the House of Windsor established, we can now trace the final section of the family tree, the path from Queen Victoria down to Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had 9 children, and their eldest son became King Edward VII, who reigned from 1901 to 1910. Edward VII married Princess Alexandra of Denmark, and among their children was a son named George, born in 1865. George grew up and became King George V, reigning from 1910 to 1936. He was the king who changed the family name to Windsor, and who steered the monarchy through the enormous pressures of World War I. George V married Princess Mary of Teck, and together they had 6 children. The eldest son, the future Edward VIII, was charming and popular, but would cause a constitutional crisis of enormous proportions. King Edward VIII came to the throne in January 1936, following his father's death, but within months announced his intention to marry a twice-divorced American woman named Wallis Simpson. The Prime Minister, the Church of England, and the Commonwealth governments all objected strongly. In December 1936, Edward made the extraordinary decision to abdicate, to voluntarily surrender the throne rather than give up the woman he loved. He broadcast his abdication speech on national radio and left for Europe, where he eventually married Wallis Simpson and lived out the rest of his life in exile. When Edward VIII abdicated, the throne passed to his younger brother Albert, who became King George VI. He was a man who had never expected to become king, was shy, suffered from a serious stutter, and found the sudden weight of kingship overwhelming. But he rose to the challenge with remarkable determination. He stayed in London with his family throughout the German bombing campaign of World War II, when he could have evacuated to safety, and he became a symbol of courage and quiet resilience. King George VI married Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, a warm, witty Scottish noblewoman who became Queen Elizabeth and, after his death, was known as the Queen Mother. Together they had 2 daughters. The elder was Princess Elizabeth, born on April 21, 1926, in London. Princess Elizabeth became heir to the throne the moment her uncle abdicated and her father became king. She spent her childhood and teenage years being carefully prepared for her future role. In 1947, she married Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, a naval officer of royal ancestry. She became Queen Elizabeth II on February 6, 1952, when her father died of lung cancer at the age of 56. She was 25 years old at the time and went on to reign for 70 years, becoming the longest reigning monarch in British history, mapping the exact relationship between the 2 Elizabeths. Now that we have traced both bloodlines from beginning to end, we can stand back and look at the full picture clearly. Both Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Elizabeth II descend from the same person, King Henry VII of England. That shared ancestor is what makes them relatives. But the distance between them in the family tree is enormous. Elizabeth I is connected to Henry VII in just 3 steps. Henry VII had a son named Henry VIII, and Henry VIII had a daughter named Elizabeth who became Elizabeth I. That is 3 generations. Elizabeth II, by contrast, is connected to Henry VII through 16 generations. The chain moves from Henry VII to his daughter Margaret Tudor, then to her son James I of Scotland, then to his daughter Mary Queen of Scots, then to her son James I of England, then to his daughter Elizabeth Stuart, then to her daughter Sophia of Hanover, then to Sophia's son George I, then through George II, then George III, then George III's son Edward Duke of Kent, then to Edward's daughter Queen Victoria, then to Victoria's son Edward VII, then to Edward VII's son George V, then to George V's son George VI, and finally to George VI's daughter Queen Elizabeth II. Because both women share Henry VII as their common ancestor, they are cousins in the technical sense. But the cousinship is extraordinarily distant. Working through the mathematics of genealogy, Elizabeth I was Elizabeth II's 13th cousin 12 times removed. This degree of relationship is so far removed that most genealogists, the scientists who study family histories, would describe it as almost purely symbolic. In everyday life, no one would consider such a distant connection a meaningful family relationship. 2 strangers chosen at random from the English population today are likely to be about equally distantly related to each other as these 2 queens were to one another. And yet, the connection is real. It is a genuine, traceable bloodline that runs through documented historical records. The fact that it exists tells us something important about the continuity of the British monarchy and the careful management of royal succession across 5 centuries. Even when a dynasty ended, as the Tudors ended in 1603, Parliament and the royal court made every effort to find the nearest available relative and preserve a thread of royal ancestry, however thin, running back to the original founding family. Why they share a name but not a close family bond. One of the most natural questions to ask is whether Queen Elizabeth II was named after Queen Elizabeth I. The answer is almost certainly no, at least not directly. When Princess Elizabeth was born in 1926, she was given the name Elizabeth after her mother, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who would become Queen Elizabeth as the wife of George VI. There is no strong historical evidence that the name was chosen as a deliberate homage to the Tudor queen. The similarity in names is more of a historical coincidence than a deliberate tribute, though many commentators over the years have enjoyed drawing comparisons between the two women. What is genuinely remarkable is how different the circumstances of the two Elizabeths were, despite sharing a country, a crown, and a distant bloodline. Elizabeth I ruled a relatively small nation that was still finding its footing in the turbulent world of 16th-century European politics. She navigated threats from Spain, from Catholic Europe, from her own nobles, and from the constant question of who would succeed her. She had no husband, no children, and no one she fully trusted. She ruled alone, by the force of her intelligence and her extraordinary political instincts. Elizabeth II, by contrast, inherited a role that had been shaped and reshaped over 4 centuries of constitutional development. She was a constitutional monarch, which means that while she was the head of state and performed enormously important ceremonial and diplomatic functions, the actual business of governing the country was handled by an elected parliament and a prime minister. She married young, had 4 children, and was surrounded throughout her long reign by a large extended family. She led the monarchy through decades of social change, public scrutiny, and occasional scandal. And she is widely credited with adapting the institution of monarchy in ways that kept it relevant and respected in a rapidly changing world. What this family connection tells us about history. The distant relationship between Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II is more than just a fascinating piece of genealogical trivia. It tells a much larger story about how European history unfolded across 5 centuries, and about the way royal bloodlines were used as political tools to manage questions of power, religion, and national identity. The fact that Elizabeth II traces her ancestry back to Henry VII, through the Scottish branch of the Tudor family, through Margaret Tudor, through James V, through Mary Queen of Scots, through James I, illustrates how the union of England and Scotland was achieved not through conquest but through family connection. Scotland did not become part of the United Kingdom because England defeated it in war. Scotland became linked to England because a Scottish king, James I, was the closest available Protestant relative of the last Tudor monarch. That family connection, however distant it seemed, was strong enough in the legal and political logic of the time to justify and anchor the union of 2 kingdoms. Similarly, the fact that the Hanoverian line was brought in from Germany in 1714 illustrates just how seriously Parliament took the question of religious faith when deciding who should rule. When the choice was between a Catholic claimant who was a close relative and a Protestant who was a distant relative, Parliament chose the Protestant without hesitation. The bloodline mattered, but it mattered only as far as it produced a Protestant ruler. This decision had enormous consequences for the future of Britain and the world, because it preserved the Protestant constitutional monarchy that has endured to the present day. The name change from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor in 1917 tells yet another story. one about the relationship between the monarchy and the people it serves. King George V understood that the monarchy survives because the people allow it to survive, and that in times of national crisis, symbols matter enormously. By changing the family name to something unmistakably English, he made a public statement that the royal family's loyalties lay entirely with Britain, not with their German ancestry. This kind of careful management of public perception has been a feature of the British monarchy ever since. Related by blood, separated by time. So the final answer to the question of whether Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Elizabeth II are actually related is this. Yes, they are related, but their connection is extremely distant. Both women descend from King Henry VII of England, who reigned from 1485 to 1509. Elizabeth I was his granddaughter, only 2 generations removed. Elizabeth II was separated from Henry VII by 15 generations, descending through Henry VII's daughter Margaret Tudor, and the long, winding path through Scotland, Germany, and back to Britain that eventually produced the House of Windsor. The 2 queens were 13th cousins 12 times removed, a degree of relationship so distant that it is essentially symbolic in human terms. And yet, in royal and legal terms, that thread of shared ancestry, however thin, was part of what gave the British monarchy its legitimacy and its sense of unbroken continuity across the centuries. Even when dynasties changed names, from Tudor to Stuart to Hanoverian to Windsor, the underlying bloodline, however stretched and diluted, continued to run back to the same founding source. Understanding this connection requires understanding 5 centuries of British and European history, from the Wars of the Roses to the Union of England and Scotland, from the religious conflicts of the Reformation to the political crises of 2 world wars. The story of how 2 women named Elizabeth came to wear the same crown, separated by nearly 400 years, is not just a genealogical puzzle. It is a window into the full sweep of British history, and into the extraordinary resilience of an institution that has survived and adapted through more change than almost any other in the world. Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603 as the last of the Tudors, having transformed England from a small, uncertain kingdom into a confident nation, poised on the edge of greatness. Queen Elizabeth II died in 2022 as the head of a modern constitutional monarchy in a democratic nation, with an elected parliament, a free press, and a complex multicultural society. In terms of the world they lived in, the problems they faced, and the powers they wielded, the 2 Elizabeths could not have been more different. But in the long, deep river of royal ancestry that flows from the earliest kings of England down to the present day, they are part of the same current, connected by blood, by name, and by the extraordinary history of the nation they both served.